Mossman's history started with Governor Phillip being there 3 days before the first fleet arrived at Sydney Cove, which was a pretty early start for us. But of course, the Borragiggle people had been living in Mosman for at least 6,000 years. It's quite amazing the things that have happened in this place.
Well, the origin of Mosman really starts in 1831, when Archibald Mosman came here to set up the famous whaling station in Mosman Bay. He also built the first home in Mosman called the Nest. Unfortunately, there's nothing left of the whaling station except for the barn, which is a relic of the whaling station, and the ringbolt, the famous ringbolt. The real development of Mosman started around the 1870s and 1880s, when developers built many large homes. Perhaps the most famous at the time was the home built by Richard Harnett, which was the original Buena Vista. Following the 1880s was really the growth of Mosman. The famous Federation architecture was a major feature of the period, and of course, of really the whole heritage of Mosman. The origin of Mosman Council was 1893. We were originally part of the St Leonard's Borough, but following petitions from a large number of residents, the government of the day agreed that Mosman should be an independent council, and the first mayor of the day was Richard Harnett Jr.
Mayors of Mosman have been in the forefront of local government for many years, and Mosman has been a trailblazer in many ways. This council has done things that councils many times its size have not been able to do and remain solvent. Why do I like living in Mosman? It has an extraordinary sense of being part of a big city, yet there are places where you could be hundreds of miles from a city. You go to Chowder Head, you walk through the bushland there. The birds are singing, there are trees around you. You can see glimpses of water. Then you walk out onto a little rocky promontory, and spread ahead of you is the high rise of Sydney. So you move from bush to city in an instant. It's that environment that is so wonderful in Mosman.
I mean, you're 7, 8, I don't know how many miles from Sydney, and you've got all this absolutely wonderland. It's just such a beautiful place, and I'd like more people to enjoy it.
What makes Taronga that incredibly special place is that stunning view, and you come round a corner and you just simply gobsmacked. So you come through the main entrance, that fantastic main entrance, and one of the things I'd look out for on the way, which I'm sad that's no longer in Mosman, is one of the buildings, it was one of the corner buildings, used to have animals' heads on it, a bit like the zoo's entry point. And I always knew I was getting close, even before you could read signs. I mean, the age before you could read, you were near the zoo because you were near the little shopping centre that had all the animals on it. So then you get to the main entrance and it had all the animals on it. That was pretty exciting.
The The barn was a meeting place. It was one of those few facilities where everyone could come together. It was known as the place to be on a Saturday night, and many of the musicians in their 80s and 90s now tell me that if you hadn't played the barn, you hadn't played.
The Mosman Daily and Great Northern Proprietary Limited was a very small little firm run by the Walker family. It was an old-fashioned country press in the middle of Mosman.
The punt used to go across there, and there was also a ferry that used to take a tram, that had a tram on it that used to go across there as well.
I can remember the trams running down to their terminus. We still call it the tram shed. The bus shelter down there, I still refer to it as the tram shed. It's interesting how it sticks in the mind.
There were lines down to the Spit, then the other one went down to the zoo, a branch at the Buena Vista Hotel down to Balmoral, and a branch at Mosman Junction down to Mosman Wharf.
The Shark Watch set up after the war, after the Second War, with young men up in the amphitheatre, the Star Amphitheatre, issued with binoculars to search out for the sharks. And then they would use a signal down to the beach club, which would then ring the shark alarm bell at the club. That of course meant that on a long sunny day that everyone was focused on the sharks. Rumour has it that some of the young lads with their binoculars may have been watching more activity on the beach, but that would be all.
It's a pity in a way the amphitheatre isn't still there as a ruin. It'd really be something to add to Balmoral, more perhaps than the home units are.
Jap submarines invade Sydney Harbour. Their only victim, an old ferry boat converted to Navy use. 2 torpedoes found their mark before the invaders were blasted to the bottom.
I remember being huddled up in the corridor area of the house while the Japanese subs came into the harbour, and there was whatever was going on in the harbour, noise and so on. I remember we were huddled up there. I remember going with my mother to Mosman Primary School and watching her put cellophane on the windows because they thought perhaps attacks were imminent. Never happened, of course, but all the windows of the school were cellophaned up.
There was a prisoner of war camp at Middle Head, and the prisoners of war dressed in their red dungarees were allowed the freedom of Mosman. Well, after the war it took off. After the war it took off. Everybody was happy and it was wonderful.
We're fortunate to live in a wonderful natural environment and a really historic environment. But above all, it's the community that makes life great. A quarter of all our adults work together as volunteers, looking after each other, looking after the children and the elderly. And it's that spirit of community which, well, really I treasure, and I'm sure most people treasure more than anything else.
You may remember a little kiosk next to where the beach club is, which would sell hot water. It's hot water for a penny, whatever, to make you tea. So they'd pack up their sandwiches, and then somebody said, well, why don't you join the beach club? Right next door with picnic facilities and a place to change. It's a beach club, not a swimming club. And that was always the origin with those smugglers. They didn't go down there to have swimming races. They went to have a place to change on the weekend, to socialise, to be able to enjoy each other's company.
So the three of us were nattering away one day over a beer, John Sykes, myself and Dommy Lopez, and we said one of us ought to get onto council and see if we can smarten things up a bit for sport. So Dommy said, okay, I'll stand for council, and he did, and you know the history of Dommy.
There were some very good musical societies around at the time. There's Rockdown ourselves and Petersham, who were the original ones, and the Metropolitan and Cogra and various ones. But certainly the only one that I know that ever got to the air was Mosman. You rush on and you rush off and you change clothes and you change hairstyles, you know, boom, 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 and you'd finish with one scene, you 3 seconds later you're back almost to start the next one.
We had 8 or 9 fruit shops, 8 or 9 butcher shops. Chemists were quite a few, 5 different grocery stores there. We even had 2 or 3 shoe shops. Pitt Junction used to be the busy place, and Mosman Junction, you know, was like the back end of Mosman, but to Mosman Junction's credit, it built up a tremendous amount of goodwill, and it was like comparing Double Bay to Newtown. So the bottom end, Mosman Junction was like Double Bay and Spit Junction was Newtown. You want anything cheaper, you go to Spit Junction.
I was here in Balmoral in my studio, and this lady rang up and she said, "We want to form a Mosman Art Society." And I said, "Why?" She said, "We want a place to paint together." I said, "I don't like painting with other people." And she said, "Well, we were told by somebody in Mosman Council that if you became our patron, they would give us somewhere to paint." So we drew up a manifesto. The first point of that manifesto was, we will work with Mosman Council to help create a Mosman gallery is part of the Regional Gallery Association. And I got a call from Kay Clark about a year after saying, "We've done it, Paul. We've just voted the money and we've just got the grants and we're going to have a gallery." Good, good. And of course Mosman has so many wonderful, wonderful painters. You know, you'd probably never have to go outside of Mosman to fill that gallery continually. It's a great place to grow up, and it's been a great place to live, and it's been a great place to paint.
Mosman is the pearl of the Pacific. The people, the shops, the heritage, and last but not least, this wonderful council.